Hey there, if you're looking for all things Raleigh, North Carolina, you have come to the right place. In today's video, we are going to discuss due diligence. North Carolina is one of only a handful of states in the United States that requires a due diligence fee when you are transacting in real estate. If this kind of content sounds interesting to you, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button below. And if you want to stay on top of videos as we drop them, hit that notification button below as well. My name is Mike Waldron. I am the owner-operator of the Waldron Real Estate Group, one of the Triangle area's leading real estate teams. And we get calls, texts, emails, and Zoom requests from people just like you on a daily basis looking to learn more about our real estate market here in the Triangle area, or people that are considering making a move to our area. If that is you, all of our contact information is below in the comments section. Check us out. I'm happy to answer any and all questions about the real estate market here in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area and the surrounding suburbs. We would love to make your next move to the Raleigh area your best move. So let's get into it and talk about due diligence. If you haven't been researching real estate in North Carolina, you probably have no idea what due diligence is. But if you have, and if you've made offers even on properties, you're probably wondering what due diligence is. So due diligence is a fee paid from the buyer directly to the seller at time of contract to essentially take the house off the market and make it pending. You have a specified due diligence period that you negotiate. You negotiate the amount and the period with which the buyer does their due diligence and they investigate the property. This is different than earnest money in that the earnest money is usually given directly to the attorney or the listing agent's escrow account, and it sits in there and isn't in play really in the contract until after the due diligence period. The due diligence fee is a non-refundable fee, and this is where people really get tripped up. This is where it's super important that you understand what due diligence is. When the buyer writes a check or creates a wire transfer directly to the seller's bank account, or they give a certified check, that's how we prefer to do it, usually a certified check. It is completely non-refundable. The only way a buyer ever gets that fee back is if they close on the property, and then it's simply just credited from the seller's proceeds because the seller already has it in their bank account. So the main thing to know about due diligence is that it's completely non-refundable. It's made, the difference in that and the earnest money as well is that the due diligence is made payable directly to the sellers, whereas the earnest money deposit is made payable to an escrow agent, usually the closing attorney, but again, it can sometimes be the listing firm as well. And it's always due at the contract execution. So it's important to know that, like, if you make a commitment in a contract, you are making the commitment to also pay that due diligence fee. You can't, once everyone has executed the contract and the contract's been sent from the listing agent to the buyer's agent to notify them that everything's been fully executed, that due diligence fee is due. I typically don't even make my listings pending in the MLS until I've gotten that due diligence fee. It's that important. So let me take you through what a typical transaction might look like. You know, the buyer's agent represents the buyer and they prepare the paperwork and negotiate all of these things with the listing agent who's working with the seller. One of the main points of the contract in North Carolina is negotiating this due diligence fee. When North Carolina became a due diligence state in 2011, and when this happened, people were willy-nilly just like taking $50 in due diligence and taking their home off the market for 6 weeks because they didn't know any better. And then at the height of the market, in 2020, 2021, due diligence fees were going crazy. They were upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 in non-refundable money because the market was so competitive. The best way to compel a seller, other than an astronomical contract price was to give them a boatload of non-refundable money. So in today's market in 2024, it's settled somewhere in the middle. You have a typical. There's no such thing as typical due diligence fee. What I see in my contracts, 95% of the time, when it's just a normal contract that's not been on the market for 6 months or it's not in multiple offers on the first weekend, I see anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 with a due diligence period of around 2 to 3 weeks. And the earnest money's become far less important because you have so much of that non-refundable due diligence money that if you walk away before the due diligence period and you lose your due diligence money, you're not going to walk away from an additional amount of earnest money too. You can walk away at any time. So the amount of due diligence being traded has sort of made earnest money not really as important, because if you're walking away from $20,000 in due diligence, you're not also potentially walking away from $5,000 in earnest money. So the earnest money is just sort of antiquated, I think, at this point. The due diligence is really where sellers want to see the commitment, because again, it's non-refundable. The earnest money is refundable until the due diligence period expires. It's only non-refundable after the due diligence expires. So normally the earnest money too is due either at contract signing, or it can be when the due diligence expires. That's also something else you can negotiate. The things that are typically explored during due diligence, so say we go through a typical transaction, I've listed a $500,000 house as the listing agent. We negotiate within the first 2 weeks with a buyer who gives us $20,000 in due diligence and asks for 3 weeks to do their due diligence fee. They also give us $5,000 in earnest money, let's say that. So what's explored during that 3 weeks in due diligence, where that money is totally non-refundable unless you close, is you're getting an inspection. And inspections can range anywhere from a home inspection, pest inspection, radon inspection. If the house is on well and septic, you're going to get those two things inspected. You're going to get, if there's an in-ground pool or an out-of-ground pool, you're going to get that inspected. So you're going to go through all your inspections. If you're getting a loan, or even if you're not getting a loan and just want the house appraised by a third party, you are going to have an appraisal done during that due diligence time period. You're going to have you're going to have that time period to explore the HOA documents if the home or the subject home is in a HOA community. You'll get a survey, which depending on the size of the lot could run anywhere from $500 to $2,000 if it's a huge lot. There you're really looking for if there's any encroachments on the property, if there's any easements on the property. Those are the typical things that you're looking for. If you find as the buyer anything that is a deal breaker for you and you can't negotiate better terms with the seller, you can walk away. And you forfeit, in this case, you forfeit the $20,000 in due diligence. If you terminate the contract before the due diligence expires, you would then get your $5,000 in earnest money back, but you're forfeiting the $20,000 in due diligence. If you terminate after the due diligence has expired, for any and all reasons, because in North Carolina, that is, I think, one of the main benefits of due diligence for buyers. Really, you can terminate for anything you want. You could stub your toe one day and say, Fairy spoke to you and you don't want to buy the house anymore. You're forfeiting that due diligence money, but if you do it before the due diligence expires, you get the earnest money back. And that's why I spent 30 seconds talking about earnest money. People are giving so much in non-refundable due diligence that the earnest money hasn't really been, it's not that important anymore in my opinion. So if you walk away at any point as the buyer, you forfeit that due diligence fee. It's super important, super important that you realize the due diligence is non-refundable. You only ever get it back as the buyer if you close on the property. So I think you have a pretty good understanding of what due diligence is now, maybe the process of going through a contract of what due diligence looks like. let me give you my opinion on the benefits both to the buyer and the seller. For the buyer, it allows the buyer a set period of time to investigate the property and walk away. So you're never locked in. It's a due diligence state. It's a buyer beware state. You can walk away at any time. You are forfeiting a sum of money. You're forfeiting the costs associated with doing your due diligence, like your inspection fees and your appraisal fees and all the things you spent money on during the due diligence. You lose that money as well. But it gives you an out at any time during the process, as long as you understand that you are losing your investment in the property at that point, in the form of due diligence fee and due diligence costs. I think for a seller, it gives them non-refundable money for time lost on the market. When it first started in 2011, like I said, people were taking their house off the market for $50 for 6 weeks. That's insane. Losing 6 weeks on the market and having $50 to show for it when a buyer can walk away at any time for any reason is crazy to me. So those fees during the craziness of 2020 and 2011 were upwards of $50,000 to $100,000, like I said before, and people, it's very difficult for a buyer to walk away from that much non-refundable money. So for sellers, it really gives them non-refundable money for time lost on the market, and it really allows you some negotiation leverage. I have a listing that I just sold where the due diligence fee was $40,000. During their due diligence, they did their inspections. They found a very few small items. Again, in North Carolina, like we've spoken about before, old in North Carolina is like in the 1990s. So usually there isn't craziness happening with an inspection report. So this particular inspection report showed about $5,000 worth of work that needed to be done. My sellers had leverage because they had $40,000 in non-refundable money. What sane buyer is walking away from $40,000 to save $5,000? So I was able to negotiate for my seller, no repairs, no closing cost credits. They don't have to make repairs because we leveraged our position in the due diligence to make it difficult for the buyer to walk away from the property because it was such a hot property. Now that stuff happens when the house is on the market and it sells quickly. The quicker a house sells, and this is why it's so important to price your home properly. The quicker a house sells, the more due diligence money you're going to get, because in a market where there's very little inventory and you have 6 offers on a house on the first weekend, the best way for buyers to differentiate their offers to make them attractive to sellers is to offer not only a large contract price, but a large non-refundable due diligence fee. So you typically don't see large due diligence fees on homes that are set on the market for 6 months. No one's clamoring necessarily for that house, so there's no competition, and you don't need to offer a huge amount of money in order to secure that house. Why would you offer $40,000 if you have no one competing against you for purchasing that home? Typically for a house like that, you'll see someone offer $5,000, $10,000 in due diligence money. So it behooves the sellers to price their homes properly to get not only the most money, but also to get the most non-refundable due diligence money. Some negatives as I see them for due diligence for both parties. For buyers, obviously the biggest negative is a non-refundable fee. So you are taking inherent risk without knowing about the property and about the condition of the property, and without doing inspections, that this money is non-refundable. In other states, you get a set period of time, I believe, to do your inspections and do those things, and if you walk away within that set period of time, you get your earnest money deposit back. Here, that isn't like that. So you are committing to non-refundable money. As long as the sellers haven't misrepresented anything, they never have to credit that money back, okay? It's super important. Looking dead in the camera so you understand, again, for a 5th time, due diligence money is non-refundable. Negatives for the sellers is the buyer can walk at any time. They don't need a reason. They're Their dead grandmother could speak to them in a dream, and they could decide not to purchase the house. They could read something on the HOA covenants that they don't like. If you can't come to an agreement on repairs, the buyer can walk away. So even if you put non-refundable due diligence money down, it does behoove the sellers to try and make a deal with the buyers during the due diligence period, especially when it comes to repairs. Because even if you have non-refundable money in your pocket, anything that the buyers share with you on their inspection report or for a repair request becomes a material fact. Okay? So sellers either have to try and make everybody whole and find a win-win so that the buyers continue to move forward with the property. But if the buyers terminate and it's because of repairs and sellers now know about the repairs, they have to either fix them anyway or they have to disclose them. And in this market, when you have to go back on the market, explain that it's because of an inspection report and show people what's wrong with the house, you're likely to get far less than you did when you had the current contract. So it always makes sense to try and find a win-win for everybody. The other so knowing that the buyer can walk away at any time is probably the biggest negative. And then also having to fix or disclose anything that you find out in the inspection report, regardless of whether the buyer, regardless if the buyer terminates, is kind of a big deal too. So that is due diligence in a 16-minute video. I hope that makes sense. I hope that you found this informative. Again, we are a top-selling team in the Triangle area. If you have questions specifically about due diligence, drop them below. I will answer any and all questions about the process, about due diligence. It can be complicated, it can be scary, especially coming from a different state with different rules. Hire someone who understands it and can leverage it for both parties. Whether it's on the buy side or the list side, we've got tremendous experience. 15 years in this market working with the due diligence fee. So we understand it incredibly well and we know how to make it work for both parties. Again, if you have comments, leave them below. I hope that this, again, has been an informative video. If you have questions typically about the area or want to learn more about the Triangle area, all my contact information is below in the comments. Hit us up. We will gladly help make your next move to the Triangle area your best move. Until the next video. Thanks.